Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. Hey everyone, welcome to this special episode of the Dismantling Doctrine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, and I'm super excited to announce this is it. The book I have worked so long on with my good friend Tim Sledge as the editor. Not so shiny, not so happy people. How Bill Gothard, Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work is now officially available. And the good news is that because we actually released the ebook a little bit earlier than planned, that means that the Audible Virtual Voice version is also ready today as of the 11th of September. So you can order it as a paperback, as a Kindle EBook, or as the Audible Virtual Voice version. And I'm going to be working on replacing that version. We did it with an AI just because it's a lot faster and a lot easier to get it out quicker. But now that the book is out, I'm going to be working on doing my own narration of the book. I think it's really important that I be my own sort of reader for this book because I can give it the intonation, the inflections that I think I want. So I'm super excited to announce, yes, the book is officially out. It's officially available. And what I'm doing in this episode today, I'm reading to you the preface chapter. It's called The Terror of an Empty House. And I hope that based off of my reading of this first preface chapter, you are going to be excited about this book and go out and buy it. Do me a huge favor when you buy it on Amazon. Please not only read it, but please leave a good review, because that helps massively with the Amazon ranking. So without further ado, here we go. I hope you enjoy this preface chapter, The Terror of an Empty House. After school, my mom dropped me off at soccer practice. I said goodbye and raced off to the field while Mom arranged for the father of one of my teammates to take me home. After practice, I caught the ride my mom had arranged. When we reached my house, I thanked my friend's dad for taking me home, hopped out of the car, and ran to our front door. Like any 12-year-old who spent several hours on a soccer field, I was hungry, sweaty, and tired in that order. All I wanted to do was join my family for dinner, jump in the shower, and go to bed, just like I always did after soccer practice. Bursting through the door, never locked because we lived in a safe rural area, I shouted, "Hi, I'm back from practice. What's for dinner?" Without waiting for a reply, I clattered down the stairs in our split-level house, heading for the dining room. My dad insisted that we eat our evening meals together as a family, and with 6 kids in the house, that was a big undertaking. Mom had a regular chore list that my sisters and I shared each night. Some of us helped prepare the meal, someone else had to set the table, and the rest were left to clear the table, do the dishes, and clean the kitchen after dinner. Although I was the youngest and the only boy with 5 sisters, that didn't exempt me from doing my share of chores. That day, I expected that despite being tired from soccer practice, I'd still be assigned to some aspect of cleaning up after the meal. But I wasn't really concerned about after-dinner chores. I was starving. All I wanted to do was eat. As I shot into the dining room, I was stunned to see no one there. The table was set, the chairs were arranged as usual in preparation for a meal, but no family members. I went into the kitchen expecting to find my mom and some of my sisters busily cooking dinner, but, like the dining room, the kitchen was empty. No food had been prepared. This was all extremely odd. It was well past the time when we usually ate. I was starting to feel weird, and my sense of apprehension grew as I searched from room to room downstairs. I rushed from the living room to the rec room, calling out, "Hey, where is everybody? I'm home. Are we going to eat soon?" No reply. All the downstairs rooms were empty. I was struck by a surge of panic as a terrifying thought raced through my brain. I wonder if Jesus has returned to earth to take all true believers to heaven. Maybe the rapture has occurred, and I've been left behind. As quickly as this disconcerting thought hit me, I shoved it aside. No, there's got to be a logical explanation. I noticed that my heart was pounding. Maybe they're all upstairs, I thought, as I bounded up the steps to check the bedrooms. There was no logical reason why everyone would be upstairs before eating dinner, but the empty downstairs wasn't logical either. My apprehension shifted to fear as I searched from room to room, calling out for my sisters and parents. No response, just silence. The last room I checked was my parents' room. It too was empty. As I sat down on my parents' bed, I was breathing heavily and could feel a tightness in my chest. My fear and confusion had turned to terror. I had no idea what to do next. Think, I told myself, grasping for a logical explanation while fighting the awful possibility that the rapture had occurred. I started thinking of some simple, rational possibilities as to what had happened. Maybe they've gone out to eat, or maybe they're running an errand, I babbled to myself as I battled my escalating sense of panic. I know, check outside, see if one of their cars is gone. I rushed downstairs and out the back door, running over to the carport where my parents parked their cars. Both vehicles were sitting in the carport. Where in the world is everybody? With my heart pounding even faster now, I leaned on my dad's car and tried to figure out what to do next. Then it hit me. I know, they must have left a note. Maybe I missed it when I came through the front door. Check and see. They'd probably just gone somewhere and I didn't see the note they left. Hurrying back inside the house, I flew up the steps and frantically searched for a note. I found nothing. This frightening event occurred before smartphones and the internet. If you went out somewhere, the best you could do to alert someone was leave a note, put it somewhere where it was likely to be noticed, and hope the message would be seen and read. On this day, there was no note, nothing. What in the world was going on? I checked the hallway by the back door, but again, no note. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I fought back tears. I was sobbing and breathing in ragged bursts. My head was spinning. I returned to the stairs by the front door and sat down, trying to think clearly. I had to accept what I feared had happened, and with my acceptance of the unthinkable event that had surely taken place came the realization that I was in serious trouble. The rapture has occurred. My entire family has been taken up to heaven to be with Jesus. I'd been left behind to face the 7-year tribulation. My 7 years of tribulation on earth will be followed by an eternity of torment in the flames of hell. I knew this was all predicted in the Bible. It was what I had been taught in my church and at the Christian school I attended. This was the only explanation that made sense. It explained why my family was gone and why I had been left behind. Now what? What should I do? If the rapture had taken place, it was too late for me. My family's departure from the earth without me indicated that I was not a true believer. I was now utterly alone to face the horrors of the 7-year tribulation. For the preceding 2 years, since my baptism at the age of 10, I had fooled myself into thinking I was a true believer. But now, a harsh reality was staring me in the face. I had been deceiving myself. I had never been a true Christian. The fact that I'd been left behind was the undeniable confirmation of this dreadful fact. As I desperately tried to think of a way to confirm whether this end-of-times event had happened, an idea popped into my head. Check the news. If the rapture has taken place, the newscasters who have been left behind will be talking about nothing else. I'd been taught that the rapture was a worldwide event in which all true believers would be snatched up to heaven when Jesus suddenly returned like the proverbial thief in the night. This would happen when nobody expected it. One movie shaped my understanding of the rapture more than anything else. I had seen A Thief in the Night during a Sunday service in our church a few years earlier. Now I was convinced that I was one of the unfortunate ones who had been left behind. I raced back to the kitchen and turned on the radio that was mounted on the wall. My dad was a great believer in new technology, and when our house was built, he installed a radio intercom system with speakers in multiple rooms. Since my parents were strict fundamentalist Christians, this was the only radio allowed in the house, and we were only permitted to listen to the local Christian radio station. I twisted the dial from its normal position, searching desperately for a news station. Come on, what in the world is happening? After a few minutes of listening to several stations, I was even more confused. No one was reporting that countless people had disappeared. I expected to hear accounts of millions of Christians suddenly being pulled out of their cars, houses, or places of work, wherever they happened to be when Jesus returned to earth. This would surely be the biggest news story in history, and every news outlet would be talking about nothing else. Although I could not find one report of the rapture anywhere on the radio dial, the indoctrination that had shaped my thinking did not let go easily. Maybe it had all happened too quickly. The radio station simply hadn't caught up to the story. I switched off the radio and sat down at the kitchen table. I tried in vain to slow my breathing as I thought about what to do next. I wasn't sure exactly how, but I knew that, above all else, I had to confirm whether the rapture had occurred. Then it hit me. In those days, many cars had bumper stickers that read, In case of the rapture, this vehicle will be unmanned. If the rapture had occurred, Christians would have been snatched out of their cars as they drove around. I raced out the back door. From our rear deck, I could see a major road that ran not far from the rear of our house, which was located just outside of Seattle, Washington. I stood there watching the traffic for 5 or 10 minutes, expecting to hear the wail of ambulances and police sirens, but all I could see was the normal flow of evening traffic. I could see no evidence that ambulances were racing to scenes of horrific crashes caused by driverless vehicles. I could see no evidence that any car accidents had taken place. Everything seemed normal, but I still wasn't convinced that the rapture hadn't occurred that day. I'd heard that if a plane had Christian pilots, the unlucky passengers who hadn't been taken were doomed to crash, since no one would be left in the cockpit to land safely. If the rapture had occurred before I got home that day, all the pilotless planes would have already hit the ground, but I wasn't thinking logically. Standing on the deck, I scanned the skies, looking for airplanes that might be crashing to Earth. I saw a few planes flying overhead, all continuing along their flight paths as usual. I reckoned, though, that maybe those planes had at least one non-Christian pilot, so the fortunate passengers were safe for the time being. I went back inside and sat down, still trying to calm myself and figure out my next steps. Maybe television stations would be quicker to report on the rapture than radio channels, I thought. TV wasn't allowed in our house because of the potentially evil influence of the secular world that it delivered, but I knew someone who had a television, my cousins next door, Dan and Andy. They weren't Christians, so I knew that if the rapture had taken place, they would still be here. I zoomed out the back door, cut across my cousin's backyard, and raced over to their house. Through their French doors, I could see that they were watching a football game on television with my Uncle Rick. I pounded frantically on the door. Startled, my uncle motioned me to come in. I burst inside, nearly sobbing. "Whoa, man, what's going on?" he asked, with a look of concern on his face. "Everything okay? You seem upset about something. What's up?" I tried hard to think of the best way to calm down and explain my fear that I had missed the rapture, but there was no way I could make my non-believing relatives understand that a history-changing supernatural event had just occurred. I had no time to even explain the rapture storyline. It was impossible either to unpack the theology behind this predicted event or to explain how important this event was to me. Although they didn't realize it, according to my worldview, it should have been important to them too. They were non-believers bound for an eternity in hell. I could not have imagined that things could feel more awkward than just before I burst into their home, but now that is precisely what was happening. I doubted that I could make sense with anything I might say to them, given my panicky emotional state and my sky-high levels of anxiety, dread, and fear. "Look, I just got back from soccer practice and nobody is home," I finally blurted out. "Do you mind switching the TV channel to see what the local news is saying? I'm concerned about my family, that's all." "Okay, no problem," my uncle said, sitting back in his chair. He leaned over and picked up the remote. As he changed the channel to a local news network, I sat down on the couch, trying to slow my breathing and calm my pounding heart. Now I'll find out what is happening, I thought. The rapture will surely be all over the news. But after watching for 15 or 20 minutes and even switching to another news station, there was no breaking story about millions of people inexplicably vanishing from the earth. My uncle finally turned to me and said, "Have you seen enough? We want to get back to watching the game if you don't mind. I'm pretty sure your folks and sisters are around somewhere. There's got to be a logical explanation. I'm sure nothing bad has happened. Tell you what, why don't you wait here until they get home? We'll fix you something to eat and you can watch the game with us." As tempting as that offer was, and even though I had felt like I was starving for something to eat when I'd walked through my front door, I knew that watching television was forbidden. At this point, all I wanted to do was to get back home and wait for my family to show up. I thanked my uncle for the kind offer, said goodbye to my cousins, and returned home. With the absence of any rapture story on television, I was pretty sure that the big event had not taken place, but I was still deeply concerned about my family. Where were they? As I walked down the steps of my uncle's house toward my own backyard, I heard voices. My parents and sisters were walking down our steep driveway toward the house. They were laughing and having a great time. Two emotions struck me at that moment. I felt a massive sense of relief, knowing with complete certainty that the rapture had not happened and I was safe. But I also felt furious. How could my family carelessly walk out of the house and not leave me a note? I couldn't believe what they had put me through. They hadn't given the slightest thought about how their actions would affect me. I ran up the driveway and hurled myself into Mom's arms, sobbing with relief and releasing my pent-up emotions. Gathering around me, everyone was surprised at how I was acting. They peppered me with questions. "What's going on? Why are you so upset? What's the matter, Clint? Wiping back the tears, I finally managed to explain why I was an emotional wreck. I came home from soccer practice to an empty house. I searched the house for a note but couldn't find one anywhere. I decided that the rapture had occurred. You guys had been taken up to heaven, but I had been left behind. As I explained what had happened, I caught my parents exchanging a knowing glance, which puzzled me a bit. Tell you what, my dad said, interrupting my storyline. Let's go inside and you can tell us all about it. My mom and dad sat me down at the kitchen table and I went through the whole event in detail. I explained what I'd been through and the conclusions I'd drawn when I came home to an empty house that would typically be full of people. When I finished, my mother told me what had happened. On the spur of the moment, they had gotten a call from my grandmother who lived just up the street. She invited them to dinner, and in their haste to walk to her house for a hot meal, they had rushed out the door and had forgotten to leave me a note. My parents apologized profusely, but it was cold comfort given what I had been through. While I'd been panicking about missing the rapture and facing 7 years of tribulation followed by an eternity in hell, they'd all been having a great time at Grandma's house. Looking back on what happened, I realized that when I ran from my house and burst into the home of my cousins next door, I had entered a home that, while imperfect like any human family, contained more sanity than my own house. My parents had not staged the event to teach me a lesson. It was simply the result of their forgetting to leave a note explaining where they were. But the religious teaching that led me to conclude the rapture had occurred was insidious. Surely kids raised in a non-religious home would not have panicked like I did. I knew, for example, that my non-believing cousins next door wouldn't have freaked out. Along with my church and Christian school, my parents had indoctrinated me into a worldview that set me up for a feeling of constant uneasiness. I always had a sense of anxiety, guilt, shame, and dread. Was I as obedient to God as I should be? Why couldn't I live a life of supernatural victory over sin? Was I a true believer? If the rapture occurred, would I be left behind? And it wasn't just me who seemed to be having problems making day-to-day Christian living work as advertised. Although my parents took their faith in Jesus with utter seriousness, my family could not seem to achieve the promised results of faith and obedience in our home. This book is the first in a series that tells the story of my spiritual journey. I spent nearly my entire life trying to be a good and faithful Christian. As I moved into adulthood, I sought to serve and please the Lord in every aspect of my life with every fiber of my being. I worked in ministry for nearly 20 years as a pastor and Bible college teacher. But as the years went by, I began to question and deconstruct. Eventually, I stopped believing in the Bible, Jesus, and God. One thread that runs through my whole narrative is that my experiences with faith are vitally intertwined with family events. Faith and family are two intimate and inseparable pieces of my story. Based on the promises of the Bible, our family should have been blessed mightily by God. We tried to do things right and buy the book. My parents subscribed to popular evangelical Christian influencers of the day like Dr. James Dobson and Bill Gothard. They patterned their marriage and child-rearing after the teachings of these men. Dad and Mom were heavily involved in what was then called the Institutes in Basic Youth Conflict, now titled the Institutes in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP. They didn't just attend Gothard's lectures at the Seattle Center each year, they became involved in its leadership. For years, my parents served on the Host and Hostess Committee, and my dad was president several times. My parents joined with a group of volunteers who facilitated Bill Gothard's nationwide seminars and helped ensure their success. Gothard's patriarchal model shaped my dad and mom's marriage. Gothard taught that the man is the God-ordained head of the house, the spiritual head of the family, who is ultimately responsible for all decisions. The wife's role is to submit joyfully to her husband's headship as unto the Lord, as the Apostle Paul taught in the New Testament. But it wasn't just that my parents followed the advice of men like Dobson and Gothard. My family members were faithful church attendees of a Church of Christ congregation in a rural setting about 1 hour south of Seattle. My dad was an elder in our church for years. He played piano at church and regularly led worship services. My mom taught Sunday school. Together, my parents led the youth group, which met at our house for several years. All the pieces were in place. All the elements of the formula for successful Christian living were lined up and in practice. According to the promises that both Gothard and our church proclaimed from the Bible, our family should have been a rousing success, the epitome of blessings, love, and joy, all flowing from the hand of God. But it wasn't that way at all. My sisters and I endured countless spankings, making our home life abusive and full of fear. The corporal punishments were part of my parents' obedience to setting the wayward child straight, according to biblical teachings. The atmosphere around our house was far from loving and nurturing. There were positive moments, but the environment was largely dysfunctional and toxic. Where was God in all of this? Where was the blessing that we were supposed to receive by following the clear teachings of the Bible on home, family, and marriage? By all rights, our family life would have been dramatically different if all the promises we were taught were true. The Amazon Prime video documentary, Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, dramatically reveals the pain and destruction that followed in the wake of families who lived by Bill Gothard's teachings. I can relate, and that's why this first book in my series is entitled Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People. As you journey through my story, you will see that things weren't so shiny in my family and we weren't all that happy. I hope you have enjoyed that preface chapter, The Terror of an Empty House. And after hearing that chapter, I hope you want to go buy the book. The link to that is included in the show notes. There are 39 more chapters to go, so there's a lot more content yet to come. I really do hope that you buy it, especially if you're someone like me who was raised to follow the teachings of Bill Gothard, the IBLP stuff, which I really consider to be a cult. But even if you weren't, if you've even seen the documentary series Shiny Happy People and started to wonder about your own experiences coming out perhaps of Christianity, fundamentalism, whatever religious background you were involved in, you will resonate with my story. It is a deeply personal story. It's an unflinching look at the things that I went through in my life leading up to the point where I started deconstructing and ultimately walking away from the Christian faith. But not until I had faithfully served God for literally decades and decades, my entire adult life. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is to disprove that allegation, that charge. Really, it's a baseless charge that you were never a true Christian to begin with. And that is something I've heard a lot from evangelicals, fundamentalists on places like X and Instagram, Facebook, wherever you encounter. This may have happened to you. If you've talked about your deconstruction, you're walking away from faith, someone will turn around and say, you were never a true Christian to begin with. You were never saved. The whole thing was a sham, which is quite ironic because, of course, that's why I wrote this book, to talk about my decades of experience serving God, serving the church, faithfully trying to get everything right to please the Lord. And I did everything I could think of, everything I could possibly do, including going off to Bible college and seminary. I earned a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and a PhD. I was a pastor. I was a Bible college teacher. I spent over 20 years in full-time ministry and in academics. So I worked very hard, and I tried everything I could do to get it right, including teaching others how to do it, training others in ministry, being a pastor, being a Bible college teacher. So I tried everything. I did everything right and by the book. And I think you'll resonate with that story. It's not a screed against Christianity. It's just my story. This is what happened to me. This is my journey, describing my time both in and then out of faith. And as I say, there's another book on the way. Me and Tim are working on it right now. In fact, speaking of that, I'll just mention right here at the close of this episode that there's a couple of really cool things coming up. On the 18th of September next week, after this podcast drops, Tim Sledge and I are going to do an interview about this book. And if there's anyone besides me who knows more about my book, it's Tim. He's edited it. He and I have worked together for probably more than a year now to get this book ready. So we're going to be releasing a special interview. Tim's going to actually interview me on my show. So I'm looking forward to having that chat with Tim. And I've already been on a couple of podcasts. If you want to check out The Mediocre Observer, you can find those episodes on Spotify. I did a chat the other day with the host, Joshua Stewart, and we spent probably almost an hour talking about the book. I'm also going to be on Chris Shelton's show, and I'm also going to be interviewed by my good friend Janice Selby from the Divorcing Religion podcast. So that will come out hopefully sometime in October. So there will be more content coming out about the book and the sort of personal stories behind why I wrote it. You can also like the public Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People Facebook page. And that's a good port of call because not only can you interact with me there, you can contact me through the Facebook page, but also I'm going to be constantly posting whenever anything new comes out. For example, David Madison, who writes a lot on the debunkingchristianity.com site, he's working his way through an advanced copy of the book now, and he's going to be writing some articles on that site. So I will keep you updated on the Facebook page about any new development related to the book. So thank you so much for coming along with me on this little journey, looking at the preface chapter of my book, Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People. How Bill Gothard, Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work. Let me know if you've read the book. Please leave a review on Amazon. That would help massively with the Amazon rankings. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in a week with Tim Sledge as he interviews me about my book.